And something you sent me earlier today that I thought we should mention too is now there's not a single player in the Final Four who makes over $10 million. There are 3 players who make exactly $10 million, but not a single guy who makes more than that. So the streak continues in that regard. A $10 million player, I don't think, has won the cup ever. You could fact check me on that. But every time this gets brought up, I have to mention that in terms of percentage of the cap, plenty of players who have made an equivalent of $10 million relative to their percentage of the cap, whatever the cap was at that time, plenty of players have won the cup making over $10 million.
That's
right. And it's actually more than 50% when you just go back like 20 years. So I believe Data Driven Hockey on Instagram had a post about this, and that's where I got the information, and I trust that account. I trust that guy. So
yeah.
I always have to bring that to the conversation when that gets mentioned.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point, excuse me. And looking at the team that we just mentioned there a minute ago, the Dallas Stars, because when we look at player salaries and stuff, we just look at like the cap hit on Cap Friendly. So Tyler Seguin, for example, is actually the highest paid player in the NHL this year. When you factor in bonuses and all of that, it's actually around $13 million that he's making this year. But that AAV that we see, I believe, is 9.85 or something like that. So
yeah, and that's just the structure of his specific contract, backloaded for whatever reason. Most guys now, they front load it like crazy, and then they have access to that money. They can invest it.
Gets cheaper as you go, and yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
It's seemingly like that is the more prudent financial decision, especially when it's that much money and someone else is handling your money for you. That's what people suggest.
Yeah.
But regardless, this is all to say, that $10 million stat, now there's not a single player who makes over $10 million in the playoffs in the Final Four. I just have to give a bit of nuance to that because I don't think it's quite fair to say that, despite the fact that it is technically true.
Yes, that's right. And, as the cap continues to go up, I mean, it's not going to go up by much this coming summer, but the following summer, so summer of 2025, I guess, it's going to go up even more and continue to go up and up from there. And I mean, we are going to see players on teams winning Stanley Cups with over $10 million as an AAV. I mean, that's just the way it's going for sure. And another interesting note, 3 of the Final 4 teams are in no tax states in the U.S., which is really interesting, because obviously the narrative out there being that, Canadian teams have to pay their players more to stick around with the tax brackets and, just the pressure and all of that. Whereas,
and also teams in New York and LA,
yes,
or California as a whole, those 3 teams out there, like the narrative is there. And this was okay, like, not that we're going to get into this whole capology stuff, but I remember back when the Leafs guys signed their deals, Marner in particular, when he signed for 893 or whatever it is. I believe that's the number. And people were saying, and people still say, that was an overpay. But when you look, especially compared to a guy like Braden Point, who signed prior to him, who makes, I think, like 9.5 or something.
Yeah.
But the point was, when Marner signed, you have to factor in the types of taxes that he's going to have to pay. So 9.5 in Florida, where there's no state tax, a player who makes that, as opposed to 11 in Ontario, where you're getting taxed out the wazoo, you're actually bringing home more money living in Florida, although you make a couple $1,000,000 less. So that's something to consider. And that's, I didn't even realize that, but you're right. The only thing I thought of when looking at these Final Four teams, so we've got Dallas, Vegas, Carolina,
and Florida.
And Florida, of course. So they beat Toronto.
Yeah.
Someone said, I think it was Justin Bourne on the Real Kipper and Bourne show, that not a single fan of any of those 4 teams who lives in those cities owns a winter jacket. And this is Canada's game. And these are the final 4 teams playing. Like, I would imagine that ratings for this final 4 just plummet, or will just plummet after, Edmonton and Toronto, the 2 remaining Canadian teams, were knocked off.
Well, and that's the thing. And I mean, we're getting a little off track here, but I know personally I'm probably going to be watching less of the playoffs from here on out because of the teams that are left. And so, but that's a great comment. Yeah, not a single one of these fans owns a winter jacket. And I mean, by the way, what a missed opportunity for the NHL on Sunday night. Connor McDavid, best player on the planet, in an elimination game in Edmonton against Vegas, and 10 o'clock start time on a Sunday night. The only game on the schedule, too. Absolutely brutal. Anyway, that is a topic for another day.
We could have a whole conversation on stuff like that. And by the way, there were 3 goals in the first 5 minutes of that game.
Yeah.
And ESPN was playing a 9-1 baseball game that spilled into that NHL time slot. So fans wanting to watch the game on ESPN missed those first 3 goals in an elimination game with the best player to ever play hockey on the ice. Just makes absolutely no sense.
Again, we got to do a whole episode on all of this. We'll bring in a business expert and we'll have a conversation about how the NHL can better market the game and all of that. So
great idea.
Yeah, so there we go.